Every time I visited my sister's house, I prayed she wouldn't leave. "If you leave, I'll kill you both," he whispered when we were alone. For 3 years, I kept a secret that consumed me from within, while smiling at the woman I loved most in the world. Good afternoon, my dears. What a joy to chat with you today. I'm Lucille Oliver Matthews, 73 years young, and I now live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I was born in Pikeville, Kentucky, but life brought me to this blessed Tennessee soil over 30 years ago, where I've put down roots as deep as the oak trees that give the Smoky Mountains their name. Every morning I wake up early, before the sun appears. I make my coffee the old-fashioned way, drip coffee with a paper filter like only us grandmas know tastes best, and settle into my rocking chair on the porch. There, I watch the sky change colors while I work on my embroidery. Oh, these embroideries are my passion. I started when I was just a young girl, but it wasn't until after 60 that I turned it into a small business. I sell my embroideries at the Sunday farmers market after church. Tablecloths, kitchen towels, centerpieces, all with colorful designs that tell stories of our Appalachian culture. Every stitch carries a story, a little piece of my life. It was my granddaughter Marianne who encouraged me. "Grandma, your embroideries are works of art. You need to show them to the world," she'd say, and she was right. Now I even get orders from tourists visiting the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My home is simple but welcoming. The walls are painted light blue. I have little plant pots everywhere, basil, mint, rosemary, and a collection of religious figurines I've gathered throughout my life. The living room window overlooks the backyard where I planted a cherry tree that gives me fruit all year round. It's truly a blessing. Oh, my dears, before I continue, I'd like to ask a small favor from the heart. If this story touches you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories from this grandma here. You know, every time you do that, it's like you're giving me a warm hug that warms my soul. And tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Was it early morning with your coffee, afternoon during a little rest after lunch, or evening before bed? I read everything with great care and imagine each of you as if you were my grandchildren spread across America. Today I want to share a story I've kept for many years. A story about sisterly love, painful secrets, and how sometimes protecting those we love means making very difficult choices. It's the story of the strongest bond I've ever had in my life, with my sister Jane, and how that bond was tested in the cruelest way. You know, life isn't always made of beautiful moments like those I embroider on my cloths. Sometimes it presents us with dark designs, with crooked stitches and tangled threads. But it's these difficult patterns that teach us the most important lessons. And that's how it was with the story I'm going to tell you today. I was born and raised in Pikeville, eastern Kentucky, in a simple wooden house with a dirt floor, back around 1952. My father, Sebastian Oliver, was a hard-working man, one of those who left before sunrise to labor in the coal mines and only returned after nightfall. His hands were rough, full of calluses, but they had immense tenderness when he caressed our heads before bedtime. Mama, Iolanda Matthews, was a skilled seamstress. She made dresses for the town girls, prepared clothes for weddings and baptisms, and thus helped with household expenses. We were a family of 5 children, but Jane and I were the middle ones and closest in age. She was only a year older than me, and from a very young age, we were thick as thieves. My older brothers, Joshua and Clement, already helped Daddy in the mines, while the youngest, Linda, was still crawling around the yard when Jane and I were already inseparable companions. Our house was on the edge of town, on a dirt road that turned into a muddy mess when it rained. The roof was wood, the walls were timber, and we had only 2 rooms, one for our parents and another where all of us children slept together in colorful hammocks that Mama would hang up at night. During the day, she rolled up all the hammocks so we had space to play. In the yard, we had a cherry tree so loaded that during harvest time, we couldn't eat all the fruit. The kitchen was the heart of our home. A wood stove that stayed lit all day, exuding the smell of beans cooking with bacon and bay leaves. On the wall, hanging on nails, were the cast-iron pots that Mama used to make the Sunday stew when the whole family gathered after service at the First Baptist Church of Pikeville. Jane and I shared everything: the cloth dolls that Mama sewed, school homework, girl secrets. Our favorite game was house. We arranged broken pieces of dishes we found in the trash, leaves from trees that served as pretend food, and pieces of wood that became our babies. We played for hours under the oak tree that stood in front of our house, the same one that gives its name to the mountains where I live today. The school was about a 20-minute walk away. We went together, Jane and I, hand in hand along the dirt road, with bare feet most of the year. We only wore our shoes when we got close to the school, so as not to dirty them. Teacher Elaine was strict but fair. She had a ruler that she rarely used, but the simple fact that it existed made us tremble with fear and study diligently. Jane was the smart one in the family. She learned to read before me and always helped me with my lessons. I was more skilled with my hands. I learned to embroider from my mother when I was only 8 years old. While Jane devoured the few books we could borrow from school, I was already making delicate stitches on dish towels that Mama sold to supplement our income. Our childhood was simple but happy, despite the difficulties. When the harsh winter came, and in eastern Kentucky, it always came unforgiving, we struggled. There were days when dinner was just cornbread with a little bit of fat. But even in difficult times, there was never a lack of love in that house. Daddy and Mama did the impossible to keep us united, and with our stomachs at least partially full. On full moon nights, we would all sit in the yard to listen to the stories that Grandma Isabel told. Ghost stories, tales of mountain men who turned into handsome young men at festivals, of enchanted princesses who lived at the bottom of the lakes. Jane always had her eyes shining, dreaming of one day writing her own stories. Me? I dreamed of transforming those stories into embroidered designs with colorful threads telling about the mountains and their people. I fondly remember the day Jane defended me from a school bully. He had pulled my braids and mocked my patched dress. Jane, always so quiet and well-behaved, turned into a wildcat. She lunged at him with teeth and nails, saying that nobody hurt her sister. Teacher Elaine separated us and gave a sermon, but I saw in her eyes a glimmer of approval for Jane's loyalty. That day marked our relationship forever. We were not just sisters, but protectors of each other. As we grew older, the bond strengthened even more. When I turned 12, I received as a gift my first little box of colored threads, which I kept like a treasure under my bed. Jane, at 13, received a hardcover notebook where she wrote her poems and stories. At night, lying side by side, she would read me her stories while I embroidered small designs inspired by what I heard. We had a childhood without luxuries, but rich in affection and learning. The mountains taught us resilience, family gave us strong roots, and our sisterhood became a safe harbor that, in that time of innocence, we believed nothing and no one would ever be able to shake. How naive we were. How could we imagine that the winds of adult life would blow so strongly, threatening to uproot this deep bond that united us? While we wrote secret notes by lamplight and swore eternal loyalty to each other, we could not foresee that one day this oath would be put to the test in the cruelest way. But, as the old folks from the mountains say, it's in the great storms that you know the strength of the oak. And our sisterly friendship, like that resilient Appalachian tree, would need to face a merciless storm to prove its true strength. Time flows quickly like a mountain creek, my dears. Before I knew it, we were no longer those barefoot girls running through the Kentucky hills. The years passed and life took different directions for Jane and me. When I turned 17 in 1969, our mother fell ill. A heart problem that gradually worsened, silent as the drought that kills the crops. Daddy was already aged by heavy work in the mines, and the responsibility of taking care of the house fell on us too. Jane, at 18, had to drop out of school that she loved so much to help care for Mama, while I divided my time between the embroideries I was already selling at the Pikeville market and household chores. It was during this time that Jane met Ronald Montgomery. He appeared in Pikeville on business, representing a textile company from Louisville that wanted to expand into our region. A handsome man with smooth talk and polished gestures who stood out completely from the simple boys in our town. Tall, with well-combed hair and always in polished shoes, Ronald drew attention wherever he went. Jane met him at the fabric store, where she occasionally helped at the counter to earn some extra money. I remember like it was yesterday the sparkle in her eyes when she came home that day. "Lucille, I met a man different from anything I've ever seen. He talks like people from TV shows, knows everything about books, and has even been to the state capitol." At first, I confess, I was happy for my sister. After so much sacrifice taking care of our sick mother, Jane deserved a bit of joy. Ronald began visiting our house on Sundays, always bringing a treat, sometimes a piece of special cheese, sometimes a piece of fine fabric for Mama. Daddy received him with suspicion, typical of a mountain man who is not easily impressed by city folks, but even he gradually gave in to Ronald's apparent education and respect. "That fellow has the eyes of a fox," my father muttered to me when we were alone. "Too sweet-talking, too full of stories." I should have paid more attention to that warning, to the wisdom of an old miner who had seen many people come and go in life. But how could I contradict my sister's happiness? The courtship was quick. In less than 6 months, Jane and Ronald were engaged. He said he had received an offer to manage a larger store in Louisville and wanted to take Jane with him. My sister, enchanted with the possibility of living in the big city, of perhaps resuming her studies, readily accepted. The wedding was simple, at the First Baptist Church, with lunch in the yard of our house. I remember the dress I embroidered for her, with delicate flowers on the neckline, each stitch made with love and hope for a happy future for my dear sister. After the wedding, they moved to Louisville. In the first few months, Jane wrote enthusiastic letters, telling about life in the city, the shop windows, the movement in the streets. She said that Ronald was an attentive husband who took her out to dinner on Saturdays and promised that as soon as they were more stable, she could go back to school. But the letters became more spaced out and the tone more restrained. When we completed a year of separation, Mama's health significantly worsened. I sent an urgent letter to Jane, asking her to come visit us. To my surprise, only Ronald showed up, saying that Jane was indisposed to travel. He stayed for 2 days, always solicitous with Mama, but there was something in his behavior that bothered me. An excessive control over everything, a way of interrupting when we tried to ask more details about their life. Mama passed away a week after Ronald's visit. We sent a telegram, and this time Jane came for the funeral. My sister was different, thinner, with deep circles under her eyes and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I attributed that change to the shock of losing our mother, but today I know there was much more happening. It was during the wake that I had my first glimpse of the real Ronald. While we were in the kitchen, I caught a fragment of conversation between him and one of my uncles. "Women need to know their place," he was saying in a low tone, but loaded with an authority that sent chills down my spine. Jane was getting too uppity, wanting to study, make friends. I had to rein her in. My Uncle Gene, a simple but good-hearted man, said something like, "But education is good, young man." And Ronald gave a dry laugh. "Education fills a woman's head with nonsense. Then they want to have opinions about everything. Think they're independent." Those words kept hammering in my head, but I didn't have the courage to confront him during the morning. I tried to talk to Jane alone, but Ronald always seemed to be nearby, like a vigilant shadow. After Mama's burial, Daddy was devastated. His health, which was already not good, deteriorated rapidly. Within a few months, he also left us, as if part of him had gone with Mama and the rest just took a little longer to reach her. With Daddy's death, the house went to us, the children. My older brothers already had their own families in other towns, and Linda had married a boy from Somerset. Suddenly, I found myself alone in that house full of memories and empty of voices. That's when Ronald made the proposal that would change our lives. "Come live with us in Louisville, Lucille. Jane misses you, And you don't have anything holding you in Pikeville anymore. You can continue with your embroidery there. I'm sure they'll sell even better." Jane looked at me with a mixture of hope and something I couldn't identify at the time. Today I know it was fear. "Please, Lucille," she whispered when Ronald went to get water. "I need you nearby." That request, almost a plea, decided everything. How could I deny something to my sister, my lifelong companion? I sold what I could, kept some family mementos, and in November 1971, I moved to Louisville, to Jane and Ronald's house. Their house was nice, made of brick, with a small garden in front where Jane grew some flowers. Very different from our wooden house in Pikeville. It had 3 bedrooms, the couple's, one that Ronald used as an office, and a smaller one that was prepared for me. "It's temporary," Ronald emphasized on the day of my arrival, "until you establish yourself and get your own place." In the first few days, everything seemed normal, even pleasant. Ronald left early for work at the store, and Jane and I stayed at home, like in the old days. She helped me with the embroideries. I helped her with household chores. But soon I began to notice strange things. Jane would startle at any noise. She constantly checked the clock, becoming visibly nervous as the time approached for Ronald to return. The house had to be impeccable, the food ready exactly the way he liked it. He had a tiring day, she always justified. One afternoon while we were sewing together, I noticed purple marks on Jane's arm. When I asked, she quickly pulled down her sleeve. "I hit the corner of the table," she replied, without looking me in the eye. I knew my sister too well not to notice the lie, but something in her look begged me not to insist. That same night, I heard the screams for the first time. Muffled voices coming from their room, the sound of something breaking, a contained cry. I was paralyzed in my bed, my heart pounding. I wanted to get up, interfere, but an inexplicable fear kept me immobile. The next morning, Jane appeared with a cut lip. "I'm so sleepy I tripped on the carpet," she explained with a forced smile. The following weeks were a progressive nightmare. I watched my sister, my childhood protector, the brave girl who faced bullies, transform into a frightened shadow. Ronald controlled everything, the money, outings from the house, visits, even the clothes she wore. One afternoon, Ronald returned earlier from work. Jane had gone to the market, and I was alone at home, embroidering in the living room. He entered, threw his jacket on the sofa, and stared at me in a way that made me freeze. "You're noticing things, aren't you? Are you filling my wife's head with ideas?" I tried to deny it, to say I didn't know what he was talking about, but my voice came out trembling. He came closer, grabbed my arm forcefully. "Listen well, sister-in-law. What happens between a man and his wife is their business. Nobody should interfere." His fingers squeezed so hard they left marks. "Jane is my sister," I managed to say. Something changed in his look, a cold, calculating gleam. He released my arm and adjusted his tie, as if regaining control. "Of course she is, and I'm sure you want the best for her, for us. We're a family now, aren't we?" That night marked the beginning of the real terror, because it was just the beginning of something much worse to come. In my naivety, I thought the danger was only for Jane, that I could protect her somehow. I didn't imagine that, inside that apparently respectable house in Louisville, I would also become a victim of an evil that had no name or defined face, but wore the mask of a man whom society respected. The worst was yet to come, and I, in my attempt to protect my sister, would end up discovering the depths of despair and the limits of what a person is capable of enduring for love. December arrived bringing that humid cold of Louisville, so different from the dry cold of Pikeville. The city decorated for Christmas, with colored lights in the squares and busy stores. To the outside world, we were an ordinary family, the successful manager of the fabric store, his dedicated wife, and the single sister-in-law who lived with them. No one could imagine what happened behind the walls of that corner house on Maple Street. The first weeks of December passed in a silent tension. Ronald seemed calmer, even brought gifts for both of us, a silk scarf for Jane and a set of colored threads for me. To make Christmas more cheerful, he said with that smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jane smiled back, a mechanical smile that I already knew well. I thanked him, but couldn't look him in the eyes. In the second week of December, he announced during dinner, "I'll need to travel to Cincinnati on business. I'll be gone for 3 days." I saw the momentary relief in Jane's eyes, but soon replaced by a shadow of concern. Years later, I would understand why. On the day of the trip, Ronald called Jane to the bedroom before leaving. I stayed in the living room, arranging my embroidery, trying not to hear the muffled conversation. When he came out, carrying a small suitcase, he kissed Jane on the forehead, a kiss that seemed more like a mark of ownership. "Take good care of the house. I'll return on Friday." He stopped in front of me, those cold eyes evaluating me. "And you, sister-in-law, take good care of my wife." There was a veiled threat in those apparently kind words. As soon as the car moved away, it was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Jane and I looked at each other, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a genuine smile on her face. That night, we sat on the porch as we used to do when we were girls, drinking coffee and talking about simple things. For a moment, it was as if time had gone back. Jane even laughed when I told stories about the customers at the embroidery market. "Remember Grandma Isabel?" she asked. "She always said nothing would separate us." We fell silent, thinking about the promise from our childhood that now seemed so distant. I was about to ask questions that I had long wanted to ask, about the bruises, about Ronald's behavior, when Jane abruptly stood up. "I'm tired. Let's go to sleep?" The moment had passed. The next morning, I tried again. We were in the kitchen preparing lunch when I asked, feigning casualness, "Jane, are you happy?" She dropped the spoon she was holding. She remained silent for a time that seemed endless before answering, without turning to me. "Happiness is a luxury, Lucille. I've learned to be content with what I have. But the bruises, the screams at night, Jane, you can tell me. I'm your sister." She finally turned, tears silently running down her face. "He's not who we thought he was, but it's too late now." I hugged my sister tightly, feeling her body tremble. "It's never too late. We can leave, go back to Pikeville, start over." Jane pulled away, wiping the tears with the backs of her hands. There was something defeated about her that broke my heart. "You don't understand. He has contacts. He has influence. He said if I tried to leave, he would find me wherever I went." "He can't do that," I exclaimed, indignant. Jane smiled sadly. "Yes, he can. He knows the sheriff, the judge. Who would believe 2 mountain women against a respected man from the city?" The rest of the day passed in a silent tension. At night, I sat on the edge of my bed, looking out the window at the crescent moon, thinking about what I could do to help my sister. That's when I heard a noise in the living room. My heart raced. It couldn't be Jane, as I had seen her enter her room. I grabbed my embroidery scissors, the only weapon I had nearby, and slowly opened my bedroom door. The living room was dark, but the moonlight coming through the window was enough for me to see the silhouette of a man. Ronald. He had returned earlier than expected. "Hello, sister-in-law." His voice sounded in the darkness, causing a chill that ran up my spine. "Surprised to see me?" "I thought you'd only return on Friday," I managed to say, clutching the scissors hidden in the folds of my nightgown. He turned on the lamp, and I could see his face. There was something different in his eyes, something that made me take a step back. I changed my mind. I wanted to see what my 2 women were doing in my absence. "2 women?" I repeated, confused. He approached, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Jane is my wife by law." "But you, sister-in-law, you are under my roof. Eat my food. Doesn't that make you a bit mine, too?" I then understood the horror of what was to come. I took another step back, holding the scissors more tightly. "Ronald, you're drunk. Jane is sleeping. Go to bed." He laughed, a low and threatening sound. Jane always sleeps soundly after taking that little tea I prepare for her. He took another step in my direction. I've been watching you for a long time, Lucille. So similar to your sister, but with a fire that she has already lost. Don't come any closer, I threatened, revealing the scissors. His smile only widened. Are you going to attack me with that? And then what? Where will you go? Who will believe you? At that moment, I heard Jane's bedroom door opening. Ronald also heard it and quickly moved away, adjusting his posture. We'll continue this conversation another time, sister-in-law, he whispered, before turning and walking toward the bedroom. Jane appeared in the hallway, sleepy. Ronald, you came back early? Yes, my love, he replied, his voice transformed into honey. I finished business early and couldn't wait to get back to you. She smiled, relieved to find him in a good mood, without noticing the terror in my eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Locked in my room, I cried silently, realizing the trap we had fallen into. It wasn't just Jane who was in danger. I was too. The following days were a nightmare of constant vigilance. I never stayed alone with Ronald, always inventing some excuse to be near Jane. But he was patient, like a predator who knows his prey has nowhere to run. The opportunity he was waiting for came 2 weeks later. Jane needed to go to the doctor. The frequent falls were causing pains that wouldn't go away. Ronald insisted that she go alone, saying he needed to stay home to wait for an important delivery. As soon as Jane left, I felt the panic grow. I locked myself in my room, pretending to have a headache. It wasn't long before I heard the knocks on the door. Lucille, open the door. We need to talk. I'm sick, Ronald. We can talk later. He knocked harder. Open this door now, or you'll regret it. What happened next still gives me nightmares. The door gave way under his blows. He entered, closed the door behind him. The following minutes were a blur of struggle, muffled screams, pain, and a shame that seemed to consume my soul. When it was over, he arranged himself calmly, as if nothing had happened. Standing at the door, he turned to me, huddled in the corner of the bed. If you tell a single word of this to Jane, if her smile disappears because of you, I'll kill you both. I'll make it look like a robbery gone wrong. No one will ever know the truth. The coldness in his voice convinced me that he was serious. It wasn't an empty threat. It was a promise. When Jane returned, she found me in bed, supposedly with a severe flu. In the days that followed, I did my best to hide my despair. How could I tell her? How could I add this weight to the burden she already carried? And so began my own personal hell. For months, I lived a lie, smiling at my sister during the day, terrified at night. Ronald was careful. He never left visible marks, always chose moments when Jane was out or heavily medicated with the sleeping pills that he provided. The abuse continued, becoming a terrible routine. Sometimes, weeks would pass without incidents, giving me the false hope that it had ended. Then, when least expected, there he was again, reminding me of my place in that house. I tried to escape once. I gathered some clothes, a little money I had saved from my embroideries, and planned to take a bus to Nashville the next morning. But Ronald discovered it. I never knew how. Maybe he saw my hidden bundle. Maybe he noticed something in my behavior. That night, he entered my room, carrying the clothes I had separated. Planning a trip, sister-in-law? Fear paralyzed me. He approached, throwing the clothes on top of me. If you walk out that door, the first thing I'll do is take it out on Jane. Do you want that? Want your sister to pay for your betrayal? That night, the punishment was worse than usual. When it ended, he whispered in my ear, "You have nowhere to go. You belong to me now, just like Jane." The months turned into a year, then 2. I lived in a state of constant despair, watching my sister wither a little more each day, feeling my own soul fragment. My embroideries, once full of colors and life, became monotonous, mechanical. The customers at the market commented on the change, but I just smiled and said I was experimenting with a new style. There was only one consolation: being with Jane. In the rare moments when we were alone, far from Ronald's ears, we managed to share small fragments of our souls. We never spoke directly about what we were going through, but we knew. In each look, in each touch of hands, there was a silent recognition of our shared pain. On one of these occasions, Jane handed me a small notebook. "I wrote some stories," she said, eyes downcast, "like those I dreamed of writing when we were children. Keep it for me." I leafed through the notebook that night, hidden under the covers. They weren't stories. They were coded records of the abuses she suffered, disguised as dark fairy tales. A princess imprisoned in a tower by a cruel ogre. A young woman whose husband transformed into a monster when the moon hid. It was at that moment that something changed inside me. Pain gave way to anger, and anger to purpose. We couldn't continue like this. We needed to escape. But how? Ronald controlled every aspect of our lives. The money, the outings, even our friendships were limited to those he approved. The few times Jane mentioned visiting family in Pikeville, he created excuses. Too much work, problems at the store, unavoidable social commitments. And always hovering over us, the silent threat: if you try to escape, there will be consequences. Not just for us, but for anyone who tried to help us. The situation reached a critical point on the third Christmas we spent in that house. Ronald had drunk more than usual during dinner with some work colleagues. He returned home staggering, his face red, his eyes glazed. Jane tried to help him lie down, but he pushed her with such force that she fell, hitting her head on the corner of the table. The cut was deep, blood running down my sister's pale face. "See what you made me do," he shouted, blaming her for his own act of violence. I ran to help Jane, but Ronald pulled me by the hair. "Leave her, she needs to learn." At that moment, something broke inside me. It wasn't just fear, it was pure, crystalline hatred. I looked at the man who had destroyed our lives and, for the first time, didn't see an invincible monster. I saw just a man, a coward who derived his strength from the weakness of others. While cleaning Jane's wound later that night, I made a silent promise. I would find a way to free us. Not through a desperate escape that would put us in even greater danger, but through a careful, patient plan that would ensure our safety. The look Jane gave me before falling asleep, exhausted from the trauma and the medicine that Ronald insisted she take, was the same look from the girl who had defended me from the bully at school so many years ago. Only now, the roles were reversed. It was my turn to defend her. That Christmas night, lying in my bed, listening to Ronald's snores in the next room, I began to formulate a plan. It wouldn't be quick or easy. It would require patience, cunning, and above all, courage. I had a plan. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt something I had forgotten. Hope. January 1975 arrived with torrential rains in Louisville. The leaks in the living room ceiling resembled incessant tears, as if the house itself cried for the stories it housed. The wound on Jane's forehead had healed, leaving a whitish mark, one more visible scar to accompany the many invisible ones we carried. Ronald seemed more irritable since the Christmas incident. His business wasn't going well. I heard him arguing on the phone about undelivered goods, dissatisfied customers. The pressure at work meant more tension at home, and both Jane and I walked on eggshells, trying not to provoke his anger. It was on a gray Wednesday that everything reached its limit. Ronald came home earlier, soaked by the rain and fuming with rage. Apparently, an important shipment of fabrics had been lost in a flood on the way to Louisville, and the suppliers refused to bear the loss. "Coffee!" he shouted upon entering, throwing his wet jacket over the sofa. Jane ran to the kitchen while I remained in my room, embroidering a set of napkins for an order. I could hear Ronald's heavy footsteps around the house, the clink of a bottle being opened. Never a good sign. The scream came minutes later, the sound of china breaking. I ran to the kitchen to find Jane cowering against the wall, pieces of the coffee cup scattered across the floor, Ronald standing in front of her. "The coffee is cold. Is it so difficult to do one thing right in this house?" Jane trembled, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry. I'll make another." "Now I don't want it anymore." He raised his hand, and for the first time I witnessed what before I had only heard through the walls. The slap hit Jane's face with such force that she staggered to the side. Without thinking, I put myself between them. "Stop! Don't touch her!" The look Ronald gave me was pure hatred. For a moment, I thought he would attack me right there. But then something changed in his face. A cold smile replaced the anger. "Look at that! The brave little sister." He took a step back, assessing the situation. "Jane, go to the bedroom. Now." "No," I answered for her, holding her arm. "We're both going out for a while. You need to calm down." That's when he laughed, a laugh that chilled me to the bone. "Go out? You're not going anywhere." He walked to the kitchen door, blocking the exit. "Jane, I said go to the bedroom. I won't repeat myself." The look my sister gave me was loaded with terror, not for herself, but for me. "It's okay, Lucille," she whispered. "I'll go to the bedroom. Stay calm." "That's right. Be sensible," Ronald said with false sweetness. When Jane passed by him, he grabbed her arm forcefully. "And you stay quiet there, understood? I have a matter to settle with your little sister." As soon as Jane left, he closed the kitchen door. The click of the lock sounded like a sentence. "You're becoming a problem, Lucille. I think I need to remind you of your place in this house." What followed was the worst episode of abuse I suffered. Unlike the other times, when he had been careful not to leave marks, this time Ronald was blind with rage. When he finally finished, I was lying on the kitchen floor, my body aching, my lips split, one eye beginning to swell. He crouched beside me, adjusting his clothes. "The next time you get between me and my wife, I won't be so gentle. Clean up this mess before Jane sees it." After he left, I stayed there, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, feeling a pain that went beyond the physical. It wasn't just the battered body, it was something deeper, as if part of my soul had been torn out. I dragged myself to the bathroom, avoiding Jane seeing me in that state. Under the shower, I let the water carry away the tears I could no longer contain. It was there, feeling the hot water mix with the blood, that I made my final decision. This couldn't continue. We needed to leave, no matter how, no matter the cost. It was leave or die slowly in that house. When I came out of the bathroom, I found Jane waiting in the hallway, her face pale and worried. "Lucille, what did he do to you?" I tried to look away, but it was too late. She saw my swollen face, the cut lip. "My God," she whispered, bringing her hand to her mouth. "It's nothing," I lied, trying to smile. Jane pulled me to her room, quietly closing the door. "It's because of me," she said, the tears flowing. "He's doing this to you because of me." "No, Jane. He does this because he's a monster. It's not your fault." She sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "He told me what he would do if we tried to escape. Said he has friends in the police, that no one would believe us." I sat beside her, ignoring the pain that ran through my body. "Jane, look at me." I waited until her eyes met mine. "Remember when we were children in Pikeville? When you defended me from that bully?" She nodded slightly. "You weren't afraid then. You said no one would hurt your sister." "We were children, Lucille. Things are different now." "No, they're not. We're the same girls. The same courage is inside us." I held her hands, squeezing them tightly. "We're going to get out of here, Jane. Not tomorrow, not later, but as soon as it's safe. I have a plan." The look she gave me was loaded with doubt and fear. "What plan? He'll find us, you know that." "Not if we do it right." I lowered my voice, though I knew Ronald wasn't home. He had left right after the incident, probably to drink. We can't just run away. We need to do this in a way that he can't follow us. That night, after Jane took the sleeping medication that Ronald always gave her, I stayed awake, thinking. My bedroom window overlooked the backyard where the rain fell incessantly. I remembered something my father used to say when we faced droughts in Pikeville. Even the hardest earth eventually receives water. You just have to be patient. Patience. That's what I needed now. Not an impulsive escape that would put us at immediate risk, but a meticulous plan that would ensure our long-term safety. The next morning, when Ronald left for work, I began to act. First, I hid some savings from my embroideries in a place he would never look, inside the lining of an old pillow. Then, under the pretext of looking for new customers for my embroideries, I began to explore possible escape routes. A lady named Dorothy, who always bought my work at the market, became my first unconscious ally. She lived near the bus station and mentioned that her niece had moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where there was a lot of demand for handicrafts. "The tourists bring people from all over, my child," she explained. "Your embroideries would sell like hotcakes there." Knoxville, Tennessee. The name kept hammering in my head. It was far enough from Louisville, a city big enough for us to get lost in the crowd, and with the constant movement of tourists, it would be difficult for Ronald to locate us, even if he knew where we had gone. But there was still the main problem, Jane. I could persuade her to flee, but the fear that Ronald had planted in her was deep. She genuinely believed that he could find us and fulfill his threats. The solution came unexpectedly, 2 weeks after the kitchen incident. Ronald dropped an envelope from his pocket while changing. Jane, fulfilling her role as submissive wife, was going to put it away with the other correspondence when she noticed it was a letter from a woman. "My dear Ronald," the letter began, "the days without you are endless. I can hardly wait for your next visit to Cincinnati." Jane showed me the letter with trembling hands that night while Ronald was at a business meeting. "He has another woman," she whispered, eyes wide with shock. The revelation didn't surprise me. A man like Ronald certainly would have other dark secrets. But I saw in the letter an opportunity. "Jane, this could be our chance." Chance for what? To confront him? He would deny everything, and then... No, our chance to start dismantling him. An idea began to form in my mind, a plan not just to escape, but to ensure that Ronald couldn't follow us. "What do you mean?" "We need evidence against him, things that can be used if he tries to pursue us." In the following weeks, I became a silent investigator of Ronald's life. I observed his habits, listened to his phone conversations, looked for any information that could be used in our favor. I discovered more than I expected. Besides the affair in Cincinnati, Ronald was involved in shady business dealings. I found altered invoices hidden in his office, collection letters from creditors, even a document that suggested embezzlement from the store. While gathering this evidence, I continued to feed my escape plan. I discreetly contacted a distant cousin who lived in Knoxville, telling a softened version of our situation. She promised to help us if we could get there. The decisive moment came in March 1975. Ronald announced he would make a 3-day trip to Cincinnati, probably to visit his mistress. It was the perfect opportunity. The night before his departure, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I sat with Jane in the yard while we hung clothes to dry, away from Ronald's ears. "Tomorrow he goes to Cincinnati," I whispered. Jane nodded, eyes downcast. "He's going to see that woman from the letter." "Jane, we need to act. It's our chance." She looked around, fear evident in every movement. "He'll find us, Lucille. You know that." I took a deep breath. "Not if we have something against him. Something that makes him more afraid of us than we are of him." I showed her the documents I had collected, evidence of financial fraud, of the extramarital affair, even records of gambling debts that I discovered he had. "If he comes after us, we can turn all this over to the authorities. Even his friends in the police would have a hard time covering up so much." I saw a gleam in Jane's eyes that I hadn't seen in years, a spark of the brave girl she had been. Where would we go? Knoxville, Tennessee. I have a cousin there, Nancy. She got a place for us to stay, at least in the beginning. It's far. Exactly why it's perfect. That night, while we packed Ronald's bags for his business trip, we plotted our own escape. Hidden under the folds of his suits were our hopes for freedom. The next day, after saying goodbye with his usual cold kiss on Jane's forehead, Ronald departed. As soon as the car turned the corner, we began the final preparations. We separated only the essentials, some clothes, the compromising documents that would serve as our protection, my hidden savings, and of course my embroidery materials. Jane insisted on taking the notebook where she had recorded the abuses in code. One day, maybe I'll have the courage to show the world what he really is, she said, as she tucked the notebook deep into her bag. We were almost ready to leave when the doorbell rang. My heart raced in my chest. No one ever visited us without warning. Ronald made sure of that. Through the window, I saw a man in a suit. I didn't recognize him immediately, but the badge in his hand was unmistakable. A police officer. "It's the police," I whispered to Jane, who immediately turned pale. "He knew," she murmured. "Somehow, he knew we were going to run away." Impossible. I tried to stay calm, though my own fear threatened to suffocate me. "Stay here. I'll see what he wants." With trembling legs, I opened the door. The police officer was a middle-aged man with deep circles under his eyes and a grave expression. "Mrs. Lucille, sister of Jane Montgomery?" I nodded, unable to speak. "I need to speak with Mrs. Jane. It's about her husband, Ronald Montgomery." Jane appeared behind me, holding my arm tightly. "What happened to Ronald?" The officer took off his hat, a gesture that I immediately recognized as a prelude to bad news. "Ma'am, I regret to inform you that your husband was in an accident on the road to Cincinnati. His car went off the road during the storm and—" He didn't need to finish. The expression on his face said it all. Ronald was dead. The following hours passed in a surreal blur. We received the details of the accident. Apparently, Ronald was driving at high speed in heavy rain. The car rolled over several times, and he died instantly. No one else was involved. When the officer finally left, Jane and I sat at the kitchen table, looking at each other in silence. There were no tears, no cries of despair as would be expected from a widow. There was just an emptiness, a disbelief, and something else that I couldn't name. "It's over," Jane finally whispered. "He's really gone." I took her hands across the table. They were ice cold. "Yes, it's over." That night, we slept in the same room, as we did when we were children in Pikeville. Lying side by side, looking at the ceiling, processing the unexpected turn that fate had brought us. "What do we do now?" Jane asked in the darkness. I thought for a moment. Our escape plan was no longer necessary, but the idea of remaining in that house, where so much suffering had occurred, was unbearable. "We can still go to Knoxville," I suggested. "Start over, away from all this." I felt, more than saw, Jane nod in the darkness. Yes, away from here, away from these memories. In the days that followed, we took care of the funeral arrangements with mechanical efficiency. The wake was brief, with few present, some of Ronald's work colleagues, curious neighbors, but no one who really knew him beyond the facade he maintained. We discovered more about Ronald's double life during this period. Substantial debts, the affair in Cincinnati that had lasted for years, indications of embezzlement at the store where he worked. The image of the respectable man completely fell apart, revealing what we always knew. Behind the social mask, there was only a weak and cruel man. A week after the burial, we sold what we could from the house and took a bus to Knoxville. As the vehicle moved away from Louisville, I looked out the window at the city that had been our prison for almost 4 years. Ronald's death didn't erase what we had lived through. The scars, both physical and emotional, would remain with us. But as the distance between us and that house increased, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: the possibility of healing. Jane fell asleep with her head on my shoulder during the trip. Her face, for the first time in years, seemed at peace. Looking at her, I made a silent promise. From that moment on, I would dedicate my life to rebuilding what Ronald had destroyed. Not just our individual lives, but the bond between us. That sacred bond of sisters that not even the hell we lived through managed to completely break. The road to Knoxville was long, but each mile took us away from the past and brought us closer to a possibility we had almost forgotten. Freedom. And that's what mattered now. Not what we lost, but what we could rebuild together. The journey from Louisville to Knoxville lasted more than 8 hours. The bus bumped along the potholed mountain roads, stopping in small towns along the way. Each stop took us further from the past and closer to a new life that we still couldn't completely imagine. We arrived in Knoxville on an April morning in 1975. The city was preparing for the spring festival that would happen the following month, celebrating the region's heritage. The streets near the University of Tennessee already showed the typical movement of vendors and visitors who arrived in advance. My cousin Nancy was waiting for us at the bus station, a strong woman with hands calloused from work in her vegetable garden and a welcoming smile. She had moved to Knoxville 10 years earlier, attracted by the promise of a better life in the city that was growing, driven by tourism to the Great Smoky Mountains. "My poor dears," she said as she hugged us. "You're home now. What's past is past." Nancy took us to her simple house on the outskirts of the city. It was a small construction, but clean and welcoming, with a cement floor and white-painted walls. In the back, a small yard with some chickens and a cherry tree, the same one that, years later, I would replicate in my own house. "You stay here as long as you need," she assured, showing us the small room in the back that she had prepared for us, "until you settle in and find your own place." In the first few days, Jane hardly spoke. She spent hours sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, looking at the horizon, as if still processing everything we had lived through. At night, she would wake up screaming, tormented by nightmares. I hugged her until she went back to sleep, murmuring words of comfort like our mother did when we were little. I started selling my embroideries at the local market almost immediately. Nancy was right. There was demand for handicrafts in Knoxville, especially during the tourist season. I set up in a little corner of Market Square on Sundays, displaying tablecloths, napkins, and dish towels with the colorful designs that always made my style unique. Gradually, I gained a small clientele. My pieces stood out for their attention to detail and the vivid colors that contrasted with the local crafts, which were more subdued. A lady named Rachel, owner of a small souvenir shop for tourists, began to order pieces from me regularly. "Your embroideries have life," she would say. "They tell stories without words." It was true. Each piece I created carried a bit of my own story, not the horrors experienced in Louisville, but the good memories of childhood in Pikeville, the colors of the mountains, the stories that Grandma Isabel told. It was my way of preserving what was beautiful in our past while we built a new future. Jane began to improve after 2 months in Knoxville. The distance from Louisville, the certainty that Ronald would never hurt us again, gradually brought back something of the Jane I knew. She began to accompany me to the markets, initially just sitting by my side, then helping to organize the pieces and attend to customers. It was at one of these markets in July 1975 that we met Mr. Arthur, an elderly gentleman with graying hair and skin weathered by the sun, who stopped to admire my embroideries. "Delicate work you have here, miss," he commented, examining a set of napkins. "Reminds me of what my late wife used to make." I thanked him for the compliment, and he continued the conversation, telling us that he owned a small bookstore near the church. "And you? Where are you from? I don't remember seeing this type of embroidery around here before." "We're from Kentucky," I replied, without going into details. "We came to start life over in Knoxville." He nodded, as if understanding more than was said. "Knoxville is good for new beginnings. The Great Smoky Mountains welcome everyone." Before leaving, he bought an entire set of tablecloths and left us his card. "If you need anything, just stop by the bookstore. I always need help there, especially with the arrival of tourists." That casual encounter would change our lives. A week later, when Jane mentioned that she would like to work to help with expenses, I remembered Mr. Arthur's card. We went to the bookstore, a modest establishment on Cedar Street, a few blocks from the church. "Well, if it isn't the embroidery ladies," he exclaimed upon seeing us. I explained that Jane was looking for work, and his eyes lit up. "Thank the Lord. I need someone to help me with the books and customer service. My eyesight isn't what it used to be." Jane started working at the bookstore the next day. It was a quiet environment, frequented mainly by students and book lovers who bought novels and small souvenirs. Mr. Arthur was a gentle, respectful employer who never raised his voice or made unreasonable demands, the opposite of everything Ronald represented. Gradually, I watched my sister recover not only her physical health, but also something of her spirit. The sparkle in her eyes, the interest in the books she sold at the bookstore, even an occasional smile that illuminated her face. She spent hours organizing the shelves, reading in moments of calm, rediscovering again the pleasure in the words she had loved so much in her youth. In September of that year, with the money we managed to save, we rented a simple little house in the same neighborhood where Nancy lived. It was small, just 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and bathroom, but it was ours. The first place we could truly call home since we left our parents' house in Pikeville. On moving day, when we brought our few things and arranged the rooms, Jane cried. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, of gratitude. Sitting on the floor of the empty living room, with just 2 mattresses and a small table that Nancy gave us, we had a simple meal of beans with cornbread. "Remember when we were children and played house?" Jane asked, smiling through the tears. "We used broken pieces of dishes and leaves from the yard." "And now we have our own real house," I completed, holding her hand. "Thank you, Lucille," she whispered, "for not giving up on me, for being strong when I couldn't be." That night marked a new beginning for both of us. We were no longer victims fleeing from a terrible past. We were survivors building a future. The months turned into years. My embroidery business grew, and soon I was teaching the technique to other women in the community. Jane continued at the bookstore, eventually taking over the management when Mr. Arthur began to have more serious health problems. In 1978, 3 years after our arrival in Knoxville, something happened that we didn't expect. Mr. Arthur, then 67 years old, a widower for more than a decade, asked Jane to marry him. "I know I'm too old," he said during a dinner at our house, "and I'll perfectly understand if the answer is no. But I want you to know that I respect and admire you more than anyone I've ever known." Jane looked at me, as if asking for permission or advice. I saw in her eyes not the fear that existed in Ronald's time, but a genuine doubt, a real consideration. "It's your decision, Jane," I said softly. "What does your heart say?" A week later, she accepted. The wedding was simple, at the First Baptist Church, with few guests. Nancy, some friends we had made in the city, customers from the bookstore. I made a point of embroidering Jane's dress personally, a work that took months, but became my masterpiece. Many people questioned Jane's decision. The age difference was considerable, he at 67, she at 27. But those who knew their story saw beyond the numbers. Mr. Arthur never knew all the details of what we experienced in Louisville, but understood enough to treat Jane with the delicacy and respect she deserved. It was a happy, quiet marriage based on companionship and mutual respect. They lived together for almost 20 years until his death in 1997 at the age of 86. During this time, the bookstore prospered under the care of both, also transforming into a small library that became a meeting point for intellectuals and students in the region. Jane never had children, a consequence perhaps of the years of abuse her body suffered. But she found in reading and writing a way to channel her love. She began to write short stories, stories for children who frequented the bookstore. Eventually, with Mr. Arthur's encouragement, she published a collection of children's tales about the mountains, which became popular in local schools. As for me, I remained single. Not for lack of suitors, there were some over the years, but by choice. What I experienced with Ronald left deep scars that made it difficult to trust again. I preferred to dedicate my life to the art of embroidery and to my sister, who always was and always would be the most important person to me. In 1982, with the help of a small loan that Jane and Mr. Arthur helped me get, I opened my own embroidery shop. A modest space on Cedar Avenue, close to the path that tourists take to visit the Great Smoky Mountains. Lucille's Embroideries, a simple name for a realized dream. The shop prospered beyond my expectations. I hired local women to help me, many of them with stories of difficulties similar to ours. Without realizing it, I created a small refuge where women found not only work, but welcome and understanding. One of these women was Elizabeth, who arrived at my door in 1985 with a black eye poorly disguised by makeup and a small daughter in her arms. I didn't need explanations. I recognized in her the same look that Jane had in the years in Louisville. "I need work, Miss Lucille," she said, her voice trembling. "Anything." I hired her on the spot, without questions. In the following months, as I gained her trust, Elizabeth told me her story. A violent husband, years of abuse, the constant fear. When he threatened to hit their daughter, Margaret, then 4 years old, she finally found the courage to leave home. That's when I realized that what we lived through wasn't just our personal story. It was the story of so many other women. And that my experience, as painful as it had been, could serve to help others find the same strength I found. With the help of Jane and Mr. Arthur, I began to transform the back of the shop into a small support center. Nothing official, nothing grandiose, just a safe space where women in situations of violence could find practical help. A place to stay for a few days, guidance to find work, support to report abusers when possible. We did everything discreetly, always being careful not to attract negative attention. Knoxville was a conservative city, and many still believed that what happens between husband and wife is no one else's business. But gradually, we built a support network, a doctor who attended without asking questions, a teacher who welcomed children at school without requiring immediate documentation, even a young lawyer who offered free legal guidance. In 1990, 15 years after our arrival in Knoxville, Jane and I finally felt it was safe to return to Pikeville for a visit. Almost all the relatives had already died or moved, but we wanted to revisit the childhood home, to properly close that chapter of our lives. The trip was emotional and melancholy. The house where we grew up had been sold and modified, almost unrecognizable. The cherry tree in the yard no longer existed, nor the oak tree in front. But the memories remained alive, the games in the yard, Grandma Isabel's stories, the secret notes we exchanged before sleeping. We visited our parents' graves in the local cemetery, left flowers, and prayed for their souls. In a way, it was a farewell, not just to them, but also to the girls we once were, before life taught us its hardest lessons. On the way back to Knoxville, Jane held my hand throughout the bus trip. "We made it, didn't we?" she said, looking out the window at the dry landscape of the mountains. "We survived." "Yes," I replied, squeezing her hand. "And more than that, we helped others survive too." When Mr. Arthur passed away in 1997, Jane inherited the bookstore. At 46, she was a woman respected in the community. The bookstore had become a cultural center, with reading nights, literary gatherings, even a small space for local art exhibitions. She had flourished, finding in literature the healing that no doctor could offer. I continued with my embroidery shop and the silent work of supporting women. In 2000, at 48, I adopted Mary Ann, daughter of one of the women we helped, who unfortunately passed away due to health complications. The girl was then 10 years old and carried in her eyes the same silent strength I had seen in so many survivors. Raising Marianne was one of the greatest joys of my life. Seeing a child who had known so much suffering flourish in an environment of love and safety gave me a renewed purpose. She became not just my daughter, but my partner in the work of helping other women. Today, looking back at the journey that began in that wooden house in Pikeville and brought us here, I feel a mixture of sadness for what we lost and gratitude for what we achieved. The path was long and painful, but each step strengthened us. Each scar taught us a lesson. Jane, now 74, continues at the bookstore, though she no longer works every day. Her collection of children's stories is in its 3rd edition, and she finally found the courage to start writing about our story, in a veiled form, in a novel she hopes to publish soon. I, at 73, still embroider almost daily, though my fingers are no longer as agile. The shop is now mainly managed by Marianne, who expanded the business to include courses and workshops. The work with women in situations of violence has grown and formalized. We now have a small non-profit, officially registered, that offers temporary shelter and professional training. Our escape plan from Louisville, which seemed so desperate at the time, transformed into something much larger than we could imagine. The tragedy we lived through became the seed of hope for so many other women. As Jane says in one of the poems she wrote recently, "From the deepest pain was born the tallest tree, the one that today gives shade to those who need to rest." And so, every day, we continue our silent work of healing, not just our own wounds, but the wounds of so many others who, like us, seek a new beginning. And so, my dears, we come to the present day. The calendar marks 2025, and it's been 50 years since I arrived in Knoxville on that April morning. Who would have thought that that frightened young woman, with a small suitcase and a heart full of scars, would find not just refuge, but a true home in these lands blessed by the great Smoky Mountains? My daily routine now is peaceful, as befits a 73-year-old lady. I always wake up before the sun, a habit I never lost since the days as a girl in Pikeville. I prepare my coffee with a paper filter, one of those that modernity tries to replace with complicated machines, but nothing compares to the flavor and ritual. While the water boils on the stove, I open the windows of my little house on Maple Street. It's a simple house, painted light blue, with a porch in front where I have my favorite rocking chair. I bought this house in 2005 after I sold the shop to Marianne. I wanted a small, cozy place where I could spend my elderly years with dignity and independence. The backyard is my own little private paradise. I have a cherry tree that bears fruit all year round, some basil, mint, and rosemary plants that I use for teas and to perfume the house. On Sunday mornings, before going to church at First Baptist, I gather some fresh leaves and spread them around the rooms, a custom I learned from my mother and never abandoned. After coffee, I sit on the porch with my embroideries. Even with my eyesight not so good and fingers less agile, I can't go a day without embroidering. It's as if each stitch connected the present to the past, keeping alive the memory of everything I lived through and everyone I loved. The Lucille's Embroideries shop continues standing, now in the capable hands of Marianne. My daughter transformed the small business I started into a respected company, with pieces sold even to other states. She kept the name and the essence of the work, but brought innovations, online courses, participation in national craft fairs, even a website where our embroideries can be purchased by people from all over the world. Marianne married Liam, a local school history teacher, and gave me 2 little grandchildren who are the light of my days, Jonah, 8 years old, and Laura, 6. They come to visit me almost daily, usually after school. Jonah is quiet and observant, loves to hear my stories about the Kentucky mountains. Laura, on the other hand, is pure energy. She has already learned the first embroidery stitches and insists she will be an artist just like Grandma. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I still go to the shop to teach embroidery to the women served by our nonprofit, Stitching Futures. What began as informal support work has grown and professionalized. Today, the organization has its own headquarters, permanent staff, and partnerships with public agencies. We offer not only temporary shelter for women in situations of violence, but also professional training, psychological, and legal support. Seeing these women rebuilding their lives, finding strength where they thought there was none, is one of the greatest satisfactions of my old age. Many arrive with their heads down, frightened eyes, the same look Jane had in those terrible years in Louisville. They leave with their heads held high, owners of themselves, ready to start over. Jane, my dear sister, lives just 2 streets away. After she retired from the bookstore, selling it to a former employee, she dedicated herself entirely to writing. Her small apartment above the old bookstore is always crammed with books, on the floor, on tables, even stacked beside the bed. At 74, Jane finally published her first novel for adults, Sisters of Blood and Silence, a fictional story that, although veiled, carries much of our experience. The book won a regional literary award and is being translated into Spanish, a fact that fills her with pride and still surprises her. "Who would have thought, Lucille," she told me recently, "that the girl who wrote stories by lamplight in Pikeville would see her words printed in another language? 3 times a week we have lunch together. On Mondays at my house, on Wednesdays at hers, and on Sundays after church at Miss Florence's small restaurant near the church. These shared meals are sacred to us, a reminder that, despite everything life imposed on us, we remain united, as we promised in those distant days of childhood. The afternoons are usually dedicated to small pleasures. I like to walk through Market Square, observe the tourists with their requests and thanks, the children running, the street vendors. There is a special peace in being just an observer of life, after so many years being a protagonist of struggles. A few times a month, I receive former students from the nonprofit for coffee. Women who passed through our shelter and today have their own stories of overcoming. We exchange recipes, innocent gossip, embroidery tips. But mainly, we celebrate the life we managed to rebuild from the fragments. Elizabeth, that first woman we helped back in 1985, is now the coordinator of Stitching Futures. Her daughter Margaret graduated in law and works exclusively with cases of domestic violence. In a way, the good we planted continue to grow and multiply through other hands. Sometimes, when I'm alone embroidering on the porch, I think about the long road I've traveled since Pikeville. In the losses, in the pains, but also in the achievements and joys. I think of Daddy and Mama, who would be proud to see what their daughters have become. Of Grandma Isabel, whose stories still echo in my memory. Of Ronald, too, not with hatred, but with the understanding that his role in our story, although terrible, led us here. There are days, of course, when memories of the difficult times return. Restless dreams where I am again in that house in Louisville, hearing footsteps in the hallway. Moments when a sudden gesture, a louder tone of voice makes me startle, as if part of me still lived in a state of constant alert. But these moments are increasingly rare. As Jane says in one of her poems, time doesn't erase scars, but transforms them into maps that show where we came from. On summer nights, when the mountain heat persists even after sunset, I sit on the porch with my grandchildren. Jonah always asks for the same story, the one about the resilient oak tree that not even the greatest drought can kill. Laura prefers to hear about brave princesses who save themselves without needing princes. I've never told them the complete story of what Jane and I lived through. One day, when they're older, perhaps they'll understand the subtext of their great-aunt's novel. For now, I prefer they know only Grandma Lucille, who embroiders colorful flowers, makes cinnamon cookies on Sunday afternoons, and always has a welcoming lap for their small childish sorrows. Life has taught me that some stories need to be told at the right time, when the ears and heart are ready to receive them. I've also learned that silence, when chosen by us, and not imposed by fear, can be a form of power. My little house in Knoxville always has its doors open. Neighbors come and go, bringing a piece of cake, taking a plant cutting, sharing neighborhood news. It's a simple life, without material luxuries, but rich in affection and purpose. Twice a year I travel with Jane to visit places we always dreamed of visiting. We've been to Memphis, Charleston, Washington, D.C., even to New York City once. On these trips, we are just two elderly ladies enjoying retirement. No one imagines the extraordinary journey we traveled to get there. Last month, Jane surprised me with the news that her book will be adapted into a mini-series. "Just imagine, Lucille," she said, her eyes shining like those of the girl who dreamed of being a writer. "Our story, even if transformed by fiction, will reach people we don't even know." I received the news with a mixture of pride and amazement. Who could have imagined that our lives, marked by so much suffering, would one day serve as inspiration? That the evil we lived through would be transformed into art, into reflection, perhaps even into comfort for other women in similar situations. That's what moves me most when I look back, the transformation of pain into purpose. We didn't choose the suffering that was imposed on us, but we chose what to do with it. We opted to use our experience to extend a hand to others, to create a network of solidarity that continues to grow even when we are no longer here. And so I go about my days in Knoxville, between embroideries, teas on the porch, visits from the grandchildren, and lunches with Jane. A simple, peaceful life, built patiently stitch by stitch, like the embroideries I've always loved to make. When night falls and the city lights begin to shine, I often find myself thanking God, destiny, the mysterious forces that govern the universe, for having made it this far, for having had the chance to see the dawn after the darkest night, for having known not only the depth of human suffering, but also the incredible capacity for healing that we all carry within us. As that old saying from the mountains goes, "After the strongest storm, even the stones bloom." And we, Jane and I, managed to bloom even in the most adverse conditions. That, my dears, is the true miracle of life. My dear ones who have followed me to this point, I come to the end of this story with a heart full of gratitude for you listening to me share this piece of my life. If you're going through difficult times, if you're trapped in a situation that seems to have no way out, I want to say from the bottom of my heart, no storm, no matter how violent, lasts forever. There is a dawn waiting for you. I've learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to begin again each day. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. That flame of hope, of dignity, may become tiny, but it never completely extinguishes. I discovered we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take any more. As my grandma Isabel used to say, the oak tree doesn't choose where it's born, but it decides it will flourish even in the driest soil. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows we can bloom even after the storm. Age has given me the wisdom to understand it's never too late to start over. Our story doesn't end with the painful chapters. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. If you're hearing this story and recognize yourself in it, know this: you are not alone. In every town, in every state, there are people ready to help. Dignity and respect are universal values, no matter where you are. My dear ones, if these words from a Tennessee grandma have brought any comfort to your day, any hope to your heart, it would make me so happy if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It's like you're giving me a warm hug through the screen. And tell me something in the comments. Which part of my story touched your heart the most? It was like a gift I received from you, being able to share my journey. And it would be another even more precious gift to know that something in my words found a home in your heart. Grandma Lucille is waiting for your comment, you hear? I read each one with great care, as if I were receiving little letters from my grandchildren scattered across America. Like the oak tree that stands strong in the harshest mountain winter, you too can flourish even in the driest soils of life. Believe in your strength, trust in your light, and always remember, you are not alone on this journey. With all my love and a tight hug, Lucille.